Word up, guys. All right. Today we got Robo. He is one of the team members, or at least one of the community members over at Osmosis. He kind of replied to me via YouTube as well as on Twitter. He saw the Osmosis video I made, basically talking about Osmosis bleeding cash. And he made some interesting comments, basically saying, hey, look, we are going to be having a tokenomics revamp, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that today. Uh, Robo, hey, tell us about yourself, man.
Hey everyone, I'm Robo. I'm just a Osmosis community member. I'm affiliated with the Osmosis Support Lab. We are a community-funded organization that deals with like client customer support for Osmosis and like community initiatives and education. I do just want to say that I'm not here, on behalf of the OSL or on behalf of Osmosis. These are just kind of my own opinions and thoughts after seeing the video.
In general, if you guys did not see the video, you guys can check out, it was not last video, but the video before that. Basically, it just talked about, well, TLDR is that Osmosis is basically emitting tokens around a 40% rate. And it's currently, well, if you calculate it, it's basically spending about $500,000 in cash every day in incentives, and it's probably bringing in around $20,000 to $22,000 in fees. And it really doesn't take a lot of math to be able to realize that spending $500,000 and bringing $20,000 in is not sustainable. And the tokenomics definitely need to have some sort of a revamp. So, Robo, kind of explain to us. You're more so involved in the Osmosis community. Go ahead and give us a quick TLDR, or at least a detailed explanation of why you believe that the tokenomics of Osmosis will be changed and that it will be made more sustainable.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things that kind of came up in the video, that I wanted to address. The first of those being, that Osmosis is basically overpaying for its liquidity, or that the incentives aren't sustainable, which I fully agree with, by the way, right? And we'll get in a little bit into that as well. And the second item was the area that I think I'd kind of push back on a little bit, which is that Osmosis or Osmos somehow is having like a negative or detrimental impact on the price of liquidity that it's paired with for the other Cosmos tokens.
Correct.
But just to start with the area where I think that we agree pretty wholeheartedly on, um, Osmosis's incentives model I think made a lot more sense in the bull market when everyone was, throwing money at tokens and just jumping to get in these liquidity pools. Um, we're in a different market situation now. There aren't as many people, any participants in the ecosystem, um, and I think a really good argument can be made that we're just simply, excuse me, simply overpaying for liquidity. It's there's some analysis being done by several community members on what the best way to incentivize liquidity is.
Right.
And there's some really cool updates to that coming soon. Some of the people working at Hathorn Nodes, for example, they're a validator and contributor, are working on a system to essentially overhaul the way that incentives are paid out. This will, very likely significantly reduce the amount of incentives that we have and redirect them instead to the community pool. Um,
Okay.
Governance kind of gets to decide what to do with them from there, but you could imagine the situation where, demand ramps up again and we might want to redivert some of those back to incentives. There are a couple proposals, I believe, either on chain or going on chain in the next couple days, that are going to reduce the number of incentives that are paid out in the interim to like less represented pools. If you want to learn more about those, you can go on gov.osmosis.zone. That's our Commonwealth forum, um, where you can, discuss governance matters and things like that. Now, apart from those kind of like interim things, there are some other roadmap items that are in the works. You mentioned concentrated liquidity in the video. That is the next major roadmap item for Osmosis.
Okay.
Uh, Currently scheduled for, I believe, Q1. It's the next major upgrade, version 14. So that's something that I personally am really excited about. Um, Bringing, Uniswap style concentrated liquidity pools to Osmosis. Apart from that, I think there was one more item that's well, anyway, if I remember it, I'll come back to it. But
Okay.
um, just I know I've been kind of rambling, so
No,
do you have
you're good. You're
anything?
good. You're good. Yeah. So the biggest concern I want to say with Osmosis is obviously around the tokenomics, being that they're bleeding out. Most of the tokens on Osmosis are paired with the Osmo token. So it's one thing to have the Osmo token just bleeding out incentives, but when tokens like Stargaze or Juno, well, Juno has additional pools, but when you have your pools just concentrated on Osmosis and most of your liquidity on that one chain, it's going to bleed with Osmo because the impermanent loss. So if the Osmo token is being emitted at a 40% inflation rate per year, if there's not that additional buy pressure to buy the Osmo token, and it's a bear market, so people are selling. So without that additional 40%, even if you did have that 40%, it would just stay the same. So you need to have an additional buy pressure of more than just 40% to keep the levels the same or at least increase, because people are going to be dumping it. Without that, there's going to be impermanent loss. And if they're paired against the Osmo token, how a liquidity pool works, I'm sure you know, but for the viewers, a liquidity pool, a better way of understanding it is as a token price or a token is going down in value, the other token is technically sold off against it in order to rebalance the pool. So a good way of looking at it is buying the dips and selling the rips on another token. So if you have two tokens in a pool and one of the token is outperforming, you're going to have less tokens in that pool for the token that's outperforming and more of the one that's underperforming. It's just how the liquidity pools rebalance. You can learn more with some of the previous videos. So with that in mind, Robo, what are your thoughts? Like what's going to be done with the inflation? Because I know you talked about having it go to a community pool, but at some point something has to be done, or I mean, the tokens that have most of the liquidity on Osmo are just going to bleed to death. That's how most of the yield farms turned out.
Well, so before we get into that, I think it's important to kind of dive in a little deeper there on how these liquidity pools work. Because let's say, you're selling Osmo, right? What does that look like in terms of a pool's perspective? You're literally taking your Osmo tokens, you're putting them into the pool, and you're removing whatever token it's paired with, right? That adjusts the liquidity ratios. Like, so a good way to look at it is like, let's say you have 10, you have the liquidity pool that has 10 of token A, 10 of token B. To keep the numbers simple, let's just assume they're both worth $1.
Okay.
Um, if I want to sell my token A, I have one token A, I want to sell it for token B. I put token A into the pool, and in exchange, I take one token B out. Now in the pool, you've got 11 of token A and 9 of token B. Rebalancing that pool doesn't necessarily mean putting token B back in. It just now means that the rate of exchange between the two tokens is different. So token A now, 11 of token A is worth 9 of token B. And I think so that would make, one token A worth 0.82 or something like that of token B. That's when you talk about a rebalance, that's kind of what you mean. So it's in a sense like I guess I'm having trouble understanding how um, you would say that token B is going to be worth less because token A is worth less, if that
So,
makes sense.
okay. So if you provide liquidity for two tokens, let's just say you provide it for Fish token and USDC. If Fish token goes to zero, how much do you have in that liquidity pool?
Zero, but here's why. What that looks like in practice is you have now deposited essentially all Fish token. The pool is entirely Fish token. You have pulled out of that pool all of your USDC. There's no more USDC in the pool. That's why the pool value is worth zero. And that's what happened with Terra, for example. And one of the reasons that we reacted so quickly to try and stop that bleed out is because people were dumping their now worthless Luna into the liquidity pool and removing the Osmo out. Um, and so it's not that the value of Osmo went down in the pool, it's that all the Osmo is being removed from the pool. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying in that aspect. If I deposit Osmo into the LP pool in order to pull out the other token, which is Stargaze, now that's if there's buy pressure on Stargaze. In theory, that would work out. But most people are cashing out either into stables or cashing out into, I mean, based on the price action, I would say most people are cashing out either into Bitcoin, ETH, or stables. And I don't see them cashing out into the others. So if that's the case, you're going to have both tokens just going down in price and bleeding against each other. So I get the concept that you're saying. If people are depositing Osmo to pull out, like, for example, Stargaze, because that's its deepest pool, it's technically not the case because people are depositing Osmo in other liquidity pools. And that's also suppressing the price of the Osmo token because it's making the price of the Osmo token against all the others reduced in price. Now, I get it. If you have an isolated pool with just Osmo and stars, yes, in theory, that would play out. But now that you have all these different pools against the Osmo token, now it wouldn't work towards pulling out one-to-one. Instead, the token is theoretically going to zero. Like if it keeps bleeding out and there's no buy pressure. I'm not saying Osmo is going to zero. There is a maximum supply. I'm just trying to explain the concept of why these tokens were bleeding out.
Yeah. And I think for Osmo that makes sense, right? If you're Osmo's the one being dumped into the pool, but when you dump Osmo into a pool, for example, Stargaze again, you pull stars out in exchange.
That's if they're buying stars, but most people
right.
are not buying stars. So that's why I'm saying you're having this bleeding effect with all these tokens. Because, okay, now remember, these are Cosmos tokens. What is their security? It's proof of stake. So you also have additional staking incentives. Unless everyone is just compounding their rewards and staking, which I guarantee not everyone is doing, people will be taking those rewards and dumping them. So you have the dumping because it's just inflationary. That's how it works. That's how the network security is. And then you have Osmo token dumping because it's inflation. Now, I get it with the isolated pools, but at this point, we now have different pools and people are cashing out of the system and buying into Bitcoin, ETH, or stable coins at this point. Just going by the prices on the market, you could just tell Bitcoin dominance is increasing, and the stable coins, even though they are decreasing in market cap, people are still having to go into stable coins and cash out of the system.
Yeah, and I agree there. All I'm saying is that that has more to do with as you said, the incentives for like stars or Juno particularly than it does with the inflation of Osmo, if that makes sense. Like if it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that people are selling their stars or their Juno or their Ion. Um, I still fail to see what impact the Osmo token has on the prices of tokens that are not Osmo, if that makes sense, given what we've talked about already.
I get your argument for a isolated pool. When you're depositing tokens, you're pulling others out. In this argument, it's different with all of the other tokens paired with Osmo. Here's an example. Go on Terra. All the good assets on Terra, like Terra 1.0, whatever, all the good assets are gone. All the other assets on there paired against UST, they're worth like nothing. I mean, sure, you can get like a billion UST, or not a billion, but you can get a lot of UST for them. But you try to cash UST out, it's worth nothing. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
right now you can technically say the assets are priced against Osmo. So once all the good assets are taken out, let's say like Bitcoin, Ethereum, USDC, any of the stables, they're taken out. Now at this point, you just have Osmo and a bunch of these different assets in here that people are not wanting. There's not a lot of demand for them. They're dumping them because they also have staking rewards. So you just have an influx of tokens coming in everywhere, with the good assets like your blue chips, like Bitcoin, ETH, stable coins that are not as dilutive, leaving the system to where eventually you're left with a chain with just assets there, like dead assets that people don't want. Does that make sense? Like it becomes a dump fest at that point.
Well, I think Terra is probably not a good example, because a lot of the assets that are left on, like, Astroport Classic, for example, were all built on Terra, right? So they can't, they've either migrated, or like those tokens actually are not being actively used anymore because they're built on a dead protocol, right? Usually smart contracts on Terra. With Osmosis, um, the argument just doesn't track to me. Like, you have assets, like Bitcoin and obviously like Atom and everything, that have their liquidity elsewhere. If the argument is that, because there's no liquidity anywhere else, it doesn't compute how the price of Osmo and the price of, stars or whatever, it would be tightly correlated when putting Osmo in the pool requires taking out stars. You know what I mean? Like,
That's if you're going to stars though. The argument
yeah,
I'm making is people are not going to dump Osmo to go get stars. People just aren't. It's a risk off environment. I mean, stars is paying out incentives for people to provide liquidity. If people were so excited about getting stars, they're not paying those incentives. I'm just saying stars is an example. You can look at Juno, same thing. They're paying people to provide liquidity and people are still dumping them. At the point to where you don't have to pay for incentives is when you know you have natural demand for your token. You see what I'm saying?
yes, but if people aren't dumping Osmo to go to stars, then they're dumping it into like the USDC pool, for example. Um, what is
Right.
the
So
effect
then
of
that
that?
brings down the price of Osmo because now
Right.
you have more Osmo per USDC or per USDT because there's less in that pool. And now that this Osmo token is going down in price
Mhm.
because paired against stablecoins, it's worth less. Now you have the pool over here that nobody is touching just because nobody's buying stars. You now have stars deflating in price because when you pair a token with something that is going to zero, the pool goes to zero. That's if it that's I'm not saying
Yeah.
osmosis is going
No,
to
no, no.
zero. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to put a point out there like this is what happens. Have you ever heard of Tomb Finance on Phantom?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I
Okay.
have.
So Tomb Finance, you may have a bunch of people that want to buy into the Phantom token, but everyone's playing the Tomb game. So what do? They sell 50% of it and pair it with Tomb and put it in the Tomb Finance LP pair, whatever. And that thing is printing out 300% APR. Of course, it got less over time. But the point is that extra inflation, you now have people dumping that token. And then when Tomb goes down in price, people are
Mhm.
like, oh, it's cheap, it's cheap. So they sell their Phantom to buy into Tomb, which drops the price of Phantom. So the demand that is needing to be filled is being filled by the Tomb protocol through its inflation. The inflation is filling that need. Hence why you started seeing I'm not saying this is the only reason why, but this is why you have a dwarfed price action on something like Phantom because the price action is being dwarfed with other people going and speculating on Tomb and selling their Phantom into Tomb. It's just how inflation works and how these tokenomics work. I know they get confusing at times, but if you look at them, a lot of these protocols create different obfuscations to distract you from what's really going on. I'm not saying Osmosis is doing this on purpose. I'm just explaining what's happening on the back end.
Yeah, so I think maybe I understand where the disconnect is here. Um, when you take going back to the USDC example, right? If I have a bunch of Osmo and I dump it for USDC, the price of Osmo is going to go down in that pool, right? Um, but now the price of Osmo is going to be less in the USDC pool than it would be, for example, in the Osmo Stars pool. So what am I going to do if I'm a savvy investor, right? I'm going to buy Osmo for cheap in the USDC pool. I'm going to move it over to the Stars pool and I'm going to sell it, right? This is arbitrage, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This will, obviously I'll be dumping Osmo then into the stars pool, pulling stars out until a point where the Osmo price reaches parity across those two pools. So it's not fully correct to say that the Osmo stars pool isn't being touched. When there's a dump of Osmo, that has ripple effects across the entire protocol,
I
right?
get your argument,
It-
but if you look on even Osmosis, they did make the upgrade. They're offering routing now. So let's say, for example, there is a lower price because now you can get stars at a cheap price. So stars would actually be priced higher than what the market is because it's the arbitrage. So what Osmosis is going to then do is then let's say I'm dumping my Osmo to get Bitcoin. It's going to dump my Osmo and it's going to be a higher price over here. So I'm going to get a new token, which in this case, it would be stars because it's at a low price because it hasn't been arbitraged. Now I'm getting the stars and now I'm dumping the stars and getting my Bitcoin because it's being routed. That's the cheapest process is to route through that. So it's going
yeah,
to be arbitraged, but no stars is going to be pulled out. It'll be pulled out and then it'll be thrown right back in because people are going to dump the arbitrage and the additional yield or that additional arbitrage is going to be siphoned out in the form of Bitcoin, ETH, USDC, a stable coin, and they leave. People are leaving crypto. Like,
yeah,
just look on DeFi Llama and you see the charts like down only.
yeah,
I mean, I'm not leaving crypto. I'm just trying to put that out there. Like, this is what's happening.
yeah. But that is a market force. That is not like that is not an Osmo specific or osmosis specific event, right? If it wouldn't matter, like say if none of the pools or even half of them were paired with Osmo and the other half were paired with Atom or USDC or what have you, these actions are still going to be happening, right? So it's not it, it doesn't make a difference really if the pool that it's or the asset that it's paired with is Osmo or not.
Well, the difference is the asset is being inflated at an infinite rate. Nobody in their right mind, like if I wanted to, I wouldn't go on I wouldn't go on Uniswap, take my Ethereum token and pair it with one of those Ponzi yield farming coins. Would you do that?
No, I wouldn't.
That's what I'm
But
saying right there,
but
right
that's
there. It's because the incentives that Osmosis is giving, there's nothing wrong with it. That's how it's bootstrapping. But at this point, it's bleeding cash. That's how a yield farm, like these yield farming tokens, like Hot Dog Coin, a Yam, whatever, they bleed to an oblivion because these tokens are being thrown out there at an infinite rate. And people that pair with that token, it's going to zero.
but that's a separate issue. Again, osmosis's negative price action is going to cause impermanent loss. That is separate from the price of the asset that it's paired with going down because that asset is going to be overperforming. Like if I'm providing liquidity and Osmos just keeps dumping and dumping and dumping, I am losing money to impermanent loss. But that doesn't mean that I'm losing money because Osmo is making the value of stars go down. It just means that I'm getting more Osmo and Osmo is worth less. So they're two separate issues.
The way the mechanism is formulated, it's basically forcing people to unbreak that bond and then get out. So at that point, they're getting out in Bitcoin, ETH, USDC. They're getting out in different tokens. And then when those tokens are gone, maybe they'll go to Stars, Juno, and any of the other assets that are left in the system. I'm just explaining, like, I'm not saying Osmosis is going to zero. I'm not saying it's a horrible protocol. I'm saying they need to fix their tokenomics. That's it.
And we agree there. We
Yeah,
do.
I mean, like
And
it's causing people to bleed. It's just how it is. I mean, you're probably providing liquidity on Osmosis, and you're probably looking and you're like, man, I'm going down as fast as Osmo is.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have assets, I have investments all across the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is in the case of a lot of these tokens, Osmo is actually outperforming. It's not outperforming things like Ethereum, not even Atom, right? But if you look at the charts, especially over the last couple months, Osmo has been outperforming um, many of the other assets that are paired with it.
Okay, so that's also I kind of want to go into that as well. That's also kind of what happened with Tomb Finance. Like T-Share, Tomb token, those things were
Mhm.
outperforming against Phantom. It's because there was so much speculation and people going into it. I'm not saying that's the case happening here, but maybe some people that are getting stars or some of their tokens, they're thinking, oh, I need to go into this pool. I got these staking rewards. I'm just going to dump 50-50 into the pool and just have 50 Osmo and 50 this because it'll come back eventually. And you have people, I'm not saying people are doing that. Obviously, you'd have to get more into the analytics. But if you go back into the charts, it's just bleeding. So if you take out the Binance listing, it would just continue that downtrend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, those Binance listing things are often like one-offs, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
it's
it's a
yeah,
scam.
right. And like a week later, FTX happened, right? So
Yeah, that
that
was
was
fun.
that was real short-lived. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that Osmo is doing great. I wouldn't say that about any token, to be honest. Bitcoin included, Ethereum included. Um, I just would push back on the idea that Osmosis is holding the ecosystem down. When, in particular, like Cosmos wouldn't be where it is today without being essentially put on the map by Osmosis. If that makes
Okay.
sense.
No, hey, I can agree to that argument. We can all see both sides of the argument, and the audience can make their decision on what their thoughts are. But let's talk about a more productive note. What does Osmosis have coming for it? What are they going to do? I know you kind of made some hints. Is there anything more concrete, or is this just something that's in the air that's going through proposals or discussion on Discord? What can we look forward to with Osmosis? And should we still be bag holding?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, concentrated liquidity is coming. It'll be here within the next 3 months, assuming everything goes to schedule. Another really, really cool thing that I'm excited about that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, is Osmosis's unique approach to MEV capture. Soon we'll have a module, basically an on-chain module, being developed by Skip Protocol. It's also scheduled for tentatively for like early Q3 or Q1. And basically, what this does is it captures arbitrage or MEV revenue that would normally be extracted by arbitrage bots or front runners, and it will take that revenue and distribute it to according to what governance says. So, like a good example that's been talked about is distributing that directly to stakers of the Osmo token. So this creates like a real yield type situation um, that is something that to be honest, right now probably isn't too lucrative. But as the action picks back up again in the next cycle, um, that should be quite a bit of MEV that gets captured and distributed back to the protocol stakeholders. What I think is so cool about that is this is something that you cannot do on Ethereum. You just can't, right? Because the application layer is separate from the execution layer. And Osmosis, it's all the same thing, right? You've got an app chain specifically designed where the DEX is built into the core chain logic instead of like on a smart contract, right? And so that gives us the ability to make changes at the chain level that will, it's essentially capture that MEV for the protocol. Can't do that on Ethereum. For example, like Uniswap's MEV. You can't just make changes on Ethereum that will capture that for Uniswap. You could do it in a way that it would get captured for Ethereum stakeholders in theory, but you can't benefit like Uniswap.
Right, because Uniswap doesn't own Ethereum, but Osmosis is, yeah,
Yeah,
I get what you're saying.
yeah.
I'm assuming it'll go in the form of staking rewards or
The way it's being designed now is that revenue will be deposited into an on-chain module, and Osmosis governance gets to decide where it gets streamed to from there. Whether to Osmosis stakers, it could go back to LPs. It could be used to buy back and burn Osmo. There are a whole bunch of different ways that you could go about it, and that's one of the upcoming governance discussions that I'm really excited about as well.
yeah, I know some of the transaction fees that happen on Osmosis, the few and far between, actually go towards the staking rewards. It definitely should flip it on, at least get rid. I mean, I guess it helps with the user experience, but I think it would help with the revenue, just making a requirement for a minimum fee at least. So tokenomics wise though, is there going to be anything done for the bear market, or is it just like, hey, we're just going to keep bleeding, and when it's a better day, or we're going to start implementing to get new revenue? Like, what are they going to be doing about inflation right now?
Yeah, so this has already, been in the works. A couple proposals have actually already gone out that have reduced the incentives. And when I say they get redirected to the community pool, most Cosmos chains have a special module in them that it's called the community pool, just to in case anyone that's watching doesn't know. Um, and what that does is it holds them, on chain, and they just sit there on chain. If somebody has a good idea for how they want that pool to be spent or used, they can put up a governance proposal, community spend proposal to access some of those funds. But in the meantime, while they're sitting in there, they're out of circulation. They're not being, redirected to liquidity farmers that are taking them and selling them. So the stats that you showed at the beginning, it's not going to do anything for protocol revenue, but it is going to take that amount that we're paying for liquidity and shrink it. And so that's the first step.
So how does that redirection happen? Because it seems if redirecting the rewards, people's APRs will go down, I assume.
They will.
So if those go down, wouldn't, I mean, like if I was earning 40% APR on something and now it's paying like 10 or 15%, I may have a second thought with it, with the, especially with the impermanent loss that I'm receiving. Do you feel
Yeah.
that you would have a lot of people exiting, which
So
causes more sell pressure on Osmo?
yeah, we've had a few community members do like analysis of pulled incentives in the past, and we've looked at the extent to which that causes liquidity to leave the protocol. And what people have found kind of overwhelmingly is that when you reduce incentives by small margins, as we've done in the past, people tend to stick around, which shows that to an extent we're actually overpaying for liquidity, which is probably why, probably one of the things that's contributing to the sell pressure. Continuing to make gradual reductions in incentives and monitoring the results is the best way to kind of see like, okay, at what point is there like parity between, okay, we start pulling incentives and now people start exiting en masse, right? And so it's this kind of like slow gradual process that's already reduced overall like inflation allocated to liquidity pools by over 30%. Now, continuing to do that, we're going to hit a point where it's what's being paid out for liquidity is appropriate for the market conditions. Those can always be reallocated again later when demand picks back up.
Right.
The model being developed now by Hathor Nodes and Chaos Labs, are two community members that are working on this, is essentially it takes a look at every pool that's receiving incentives and it says, okay, to what extent are these incentives being subsidized with other tokens? What's the swap fee revenue? And we take that and we say, okay, you only need this many incentives for it to be paying out what it should be paying out to get a target level of liquidity. A good example of this is there's a Kujira. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Kujira.
Yeah.
The Kuji Osmo pool on Osmosis right now gets like something like 40% APR just from swap fees alone. So we look at that pool and we say, that doesn't need incentives. You're getting 40% APR, right? So we don't incentivize that. Things like that are what's being looked at. And the net effect of that is going to be to drastically reduce incentives that are going to pools while still maintaining APR at a rate that is competitive.
I'm just curious, what are the best performing pools that you guys have? Like, is it the ETH pool, the Bitcoin pool, stablecoin pool, swap fee
Um,
wise? Which one has the most sustainability?
are you talking about swap fees as a function of like APR or just number of swap fees generated?
I would say APR, because that would be
Okay.
the form of revenue.
Yeah, because I mean, the USDC Osmo pool has a ton of swap fees, but it also has a ton of liquidity. So the APR is not as high. Um, But if you were to go to dexmos.app, I can see and sort pools by swap APR, for example, which is a really good way to,
Yeah,
to
yeah, I've used Dexmos. Dexmos is pretty cool.
a lot of the pools with the highest swap APR are usually pretty low liquidity. Some exceptions, but not too many. As far as actual swap fees generated by the pool, we have that data available directly on Osmosis, but I don't think it's aggregated anywhere, in a way that you can see like what the biggest revenue generating pools would be.
Yeah.
One thing I might suggest is that Osmosis is, working with or involved with the Flipside crypto analytics community.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, and
Okay.
they're very very responsive in the Osmosis Discord. They were actually funded by one of those community pool spend proposals I mentioned earlier. So if you join the Osmosis Discord, there's a section where you can request certain data points from Flipside, and they'll create a dashboard for you. And I've done things with them in the past, just to create like Twitter threads and things like that. But they also work, pretty closely with core contributors to get the data they need for things like that's where a lot of this incentives data came from. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm seeing it here that the swap return is about 8.75%.
Is there going to be anything done in the form of like VE tokenomics, incentivizing people to at least hold the token or stake the token, or any form of B2 or upgrades that we should look forward to? I know you mentioned concentrated liquidity and whatnot.
I don't know anything about like rebase tokens or anything like that coming in the roadmap. But the way that I look at this is kind of like a spectrum of inflation versus revenue driving, right? Which is the same metrics that you're looking at. What I see as the optimal solution, as someone that doesn't dev on the protocol, right? But decreasing inflation and increasing revenue is going to be the best way to drive value to the protocol. On the decreasing inflation side, we've talked about that, right? With reducing incentives and thereby reducing sell pressure from incentives. On the revenue end, concentrated liquidity is going to help massively with that. MEV capture is going to be another major driver for that, going into the next cycle. It's just other things in the roadmap right now. We just launched stable swaps, which is another thing that I think has a lot of potential, to make Osmosis kind of like the curve of the Cosmos ecosystem.
Right.
Right now, if you want to swap between stables, a lot of times, no matter what chain you're on, you're probably touching curve at some point. That is a level of ubiquity that I would like to see Osmosis have in the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think that's going to be a major driver as well.
What are your thoughts on Ion?
uh,
Everyone always talks about Ion, and then people are like, "Oh man, it never came. What's going on?" I think they were working on synths at that time, or some form of derivative.
the Ion community, I think, is like one of the strongest small communities that like offshoots of Osmosis. Right now, I think the plan, and I don't follow the Ion end of it too closely, but right now I think the plan is to create a index token called
Okay.
IBTX, and this will be essentially a basket of assets that you use as an index across the
Yeah. So
ecosystem.
instead of having to pick like Atom, Juno, whatever, you just buy that. I got you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and they've got a stable coin in the works, which we'll see how we'll see how that goes. There's going to be some interplay between the stable coin and the index token, and these will kind of be like value drivers for Ion as well, in theory.
Okay.
So
Cool. Cool.
excited to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I know Ion was kind of Sonny's little baby as well, so we'll see how that rolls out. Well, hey, Robo, do you have anything else that you'd like to include, or any closing thoughts you'd like to include in the chat, or anything that you think that we missed on Osmosis that we should know?
No, just if you have any other questions, the Osmosis Support Lab is very active in all of the socials for Osmosis. Come join us in Discord, Telegram, follow Osmo Support Lab on Twitter, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or dig deeper if you guys would like.
Shoot me any links that you want me to provide in the video. I'll pop those in the video. Any of you guys watching this video will be able to check it out and visit some more details, and also get some more details on Osmosis. Robo, dude, It's great to have you on. I appreciate you jumping on and explaining your side of the argument. I know the viewers appreciate it. I always close all my shows with a wisdom one-liner. We're going to hit you guys with Proverbs chapter 10, verses 4. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. Don't be lazy, man. That's how it rolls.
Thank
Oh,
you.
man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Dude, it's an honor. Cheers.